No, just a very bad joke for all the Germans in the audience. When I first read the title of this talk, I immediately thought legal, illegal, scheißegal. But today we're learning that the cumulation of legal, illegal is decentral. And here to present are Hannes and Jens, who are, well, in the scene for a long time and sometimes left of it. Please give them a very warm hand of welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Is this on? Yeah, it is, I guess.
That one on? Yeah.
Okay. So this talk already caused some commotion even before it started, because apparently this is like the talk about Anonymous and LulzSec that is the only one that is printed in the program. And so in the last few days I got requests from the BBC and from Der Spiegel, and maybe this will not turn out to be the talk that you are all hoping for. We won't reveal all the secrets that are behind these often talked about organizations, mainly because we don't know these secrets ourselves. So if you are hoping for the big reveal or the answer to everything, this is probably not the right talk for you. But if you are up for some discussion about how the discourse around hacker ethics changed and maybe even has to change in the lives of recent events, if there is such a thing as cyberwar and cyberterrorism, you probably come to the right place. So we called our talk Legal, Illegal, Decentral, Post-Hacker Ethics, Cyberwar, or Applied Loss of Control to Hacker Ethics, or is it just good old hacktivism? Hacktivism is actually a very loaded word, and we thought that it would be best to start off with something like history. It's always good to know your roots. So you could say that the origins of what we see today as hacktivism come from a very diverse, a very loaded history of being different, being subversive, subverting the codes that make up our society. For instance, the word communication guerrilla gets mentioned in that context very often, and especially the French art theory movement of situationism is very important to that. Situationism is something that emerged in France in the late 50s, early 60s, what was at its peak during the 1968 riots in Paris, the student unrests, where they wanted to apply something like poetic beauty to political messages or vice versa. A lot of it fueled what later became the punk movement. So it's a lot of creating art and making a political statement at the same time, something which is very often not seen in the same context, but the situationists thought it was important to have that. And also they declared that the final goal for an organization is for it to fail. So eventually they failed and disbanded their organization, and today there is not really anything like situationism around anymore, except in the bookshelves of some hipsters who rediscovered this theory a few years ago. There has always been something like culture jamming, ad busting, subverting codes that we see in advertising. And if you look back a few years, early 1990s, probably the first really media-aware political movement that played around with subverting codes and subverting messages were the Zapatista movement in Mexico. It started, with someone who interestingly enough, looks like a protagonist from the Anonymous movement, and we only know him by his pseudonym, Subcomandante Marcos. He wrote large theoretical texts, and yeah, in the sense of Michel Foucault, that the author is dead anyway. We really don't know much about what the author of this pamphlet is. We can only read about the theory behind it, and it's yeah, very close to what we see now in this amorph anonymous movement, yeah, like we have in Lalsec, etc. And of course, artists have always toyed around with the idea of causing havoc and mischief on the internet. So there have been lots of political, artistic, media hackish attempts and approaches. One that I found especially interesting was the Toy Wars incident by a Austrian group called übermorgen.com. Übermorgen is the German word for the day after tomorrow. It's super tomorrow. So Übermorgen had a website registered that was etoys, etoy.net, and they were sued by one of the first internet bubble toy manufacturers, toy shopping websites, eToys, and they called out for an all open war against that other website. So yeah, the goal was to bring down the stock price of that website that sued their artistic project, and in the end they prevailed. I wouldn't say that they were single-handedly the cause for the crash of the first internet bubble, but yeah, as an art project they actually had some influence in that. And there are lots and lots of more of these examples of media hacking, using the internet, like the Yes Man, for instance.
Yeah, like the Yes Man. The Yes Man is an artistic collective of two people in the UK and America. And they managed to produce some fake websites and getting invited to the World Trade Organization and getting other names or faking some names and faking organization names and company names. Especially they managed to go to BBC and give an interview in the name of a big chemical company.
Dow Chemicals.
Dow Chemicals, yeah, about a chemical accident in India or Africa. And they managed to say on BBC live on air that the people who were injured will get some money back from the company, will get compensated for what has been done there. And that dropped the trade market price of Dow Chemical by a large amount. So they managed to produce some fake media. They also just published 2 years ago a movie, the Yes Man, the Yes Man movie.
Yes Man will rule the world, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So there have been a diverse range of approaches about disrupting mainstream media, mainstream opinion by using media hacks, by drawing attention to things, and by faking stuff, and actually by kind of denial of service attacks on media attention. And if we look back just, let's say, 10 or 20 years, maybe 20 years, in the 1990s, something that is very clearly, that can be very clearly called hacktivism emerged, and actually was at its peaks. So what we saw were attempts at having online demonstrations. We had one group that called themselves EDT, the Electronic Disturbance Theater. They handed out little kits that you could use for your cause to drive websites to a standstill. So they handed out basically denial of service attack tools for a political cause. You don't see that very often today, that there is malware or attack software especially written with a political motive in mind, but yeah, back then it was really prevalent. This was also, of course, the time when the anti-globalization movement was at its peak. So you may remember all the Battle of Seattle, all the anti-globalization things. We just had the 10th anniversary of the events in Genua a few days ago. So of course, I mean, this led to the emergence of media outlets like indie media, which is strongly tied to that anti-globalization movement at that time. Maybe it was just a few factors that came together. On the one hand, we had a usable internet for everyone to some extent, and on the other hand, we had a relatively strong politicized anti-globalization movement. So naturally, these two things came together, and we had something like hacktivism in the 1990s, which for some reasons that we will look into in a moment went away shortly after 2000. And one of the first examples, but that nevertheless was with us for a long time, was a German campaign called Deportation Class.
Yeah, and in 2001, the Deportation Class was founded, and it was basically the first politically motivated distributed denial of service attack, and it was against the deportation of asylum seekers in Europe. And there was a piece of software which you could download, and it would just start on a specific date when the management of the Lufthansa, a German flights company, which is doing the deportation, when they had a meeting on the 20th of June in 2001, and around 15,000 people took part in that demonstration or online demonstration. So it was a denial of service on the booking system of Lufthansa, and it was quite successful. I mean, there's no one imprisoned from the authors of the Deportation Class software because the authors are not known, and it was quite successful, this demonstration of what you can do online.
Yeah, there are actually a couple of points that are interesting about this example. So one thing is it was embedded in a bigger framework, in a political movement that made the topic of deporting refugees and deporting asylum seekers by Lufthansa and other flight companies, airlines, made that a topic. So it was there was also already something like a backing by anti-racist groups, etc. It was not only an online example, but it was also kind of a test to try out online demonstrations as a tool for media campaigns. So even though it came from a very organized political movement, it was an experiment for everyone involved. And from the beginning, the authors of this denial of service attack tool argued that what they were doing was actually an online demonstration and the equivalent to people peacefully assembling in the streets and making their protest heard against, say, a company or a government. This was actually then decided in court, right? So the whole story was with us, I think, roughly 20 years or so, when finally a court decided, yes, this falls under the definitions we have for demonstrations. So you may peacefully assemble on the internet for a common cause and demonstrate your protest by overloading a website. And this is actually the equivalent to having a demonstration. And well, they filled in all the paperwork that you usually have to do in liberal democracies for having a demonstration. So they had someone who stood there with their name as the organizer of the demonstration, etc., etc. Yeah, but still, they were sued, they were prosecuted, and it took them almost 20 years to have that question cleared in court. But in the end, it was kind of a success because no one was fined, no one was charged with anything, and in theory, we have a new tool in our toolbox for political protest now. Yeah, there were other things that were somehow connected with political protest and the internet.
For example, anti-censorship. So in 1996, a German provider or the German police decided that they want to remove a magazine from the internet called Radikal, which is a left autonomous magazine. And it was immediately mirrored on several sites around the internet. And one of the major ones was Access for All, which is a Dutch telecom provider, a Dutch ISP. And there were riots in the streets, and they actually made some advertisement for that website. So there's this.
Yeah, you can see the black bloc marching through Hamburg with http :/www access for all nl/tilde-tank/radikal. Back then, we really had awesome URLs, don't you think? So that magazine has a history of being banned and prosecuted against in Germany for a long, long time. It once called itself tongue-in-cheekly Fachblatt für alles, was Terroristen Spaß macht, the magazine for everything that terrorists may enjoy. So yeah, you will find text on theory, you will find claims of responsibility after direct action, for lack of a better word. You will also find the famed bomb cocktail recipes. So yeah, it's basically a collection of buzzwords for state officials to check off and ban it. And even possessing certain issues of this magazine is illegal in Germany. However, it is not illegal in the Netherlands to possess them. And Access for All as a company was first they were charged with a criminal offense. Then they found out, okay, so basically there is no such thing as distributing an obscure German language magazine in the Netherlands, which is a criminal offense. So the other court case that went against it was pushed forward by Deutsche Bahn, the German railway company, because in that issue that was censored at that time, they had some suggestions about sabotage of railway tracks. So this was actually a private company suing them for loss of profits. And yeah, I think that went through, didn't it?
Yeah, and what is also interesting is that Access for All was then censored by the German Research Net, which is a network where all the universities in Germany are connected over. So they actually did the first censorship in the internet by blocking the complete Access for All traffic. But that only existed for several weeks because it was mirrored elsewhere, and it was just not feasible for them to block all the radical magazines because it was mirrored all over the world.
Okay. Another example that we saw in 2005 was a hack called Katyusha information warfare, complete with a rather macho-style red star and machine gun that was put on websites. It was probably the best example of what is now called data antifa, data anti-fascist hacks. These people at least took the time to write a rather theoretical text about their motives, to go through the websites that they hacked very thoroughly. For many years, they monitored the traffic of several extreme right-wing networks, and what they actually could find out was that there is a proven link between the NPD, an extreme right-wing party in Germany, which claims to be legal, and on the one hand, and that they are providing a cover for a banned terrorist fascist organization called the SSS, the Skinheads Sächsische Schweiz, which might sound like a funny name, but yeah, these are like guys that actually had lists with potential victims to execute after they would come to power. They were, when they were banned, also a large amount of weapons was found at their place. So these were the guys that are practically preparing for race war, and with the help of this semi-legal organization called the NPD, this was kind of hidden. So that was revealed, that was given to Spiegel TV, the TV outlet of a German weekly magazine. So there were several remarkable things about it. First, it was very thoroughly planned. It went on for over a year. They collected all the data, all the internal messages that went on in this right-wing extremist organization. Then, in the end, then they defaced the website and put on their pissing contest marks on that website, but only after collecting everything, after thoroughly looking through that, and even though they cooperated with some very, very mainstream media and got out the message that there is a direct link between NPD and terrorist organizations, they managed to stay anonymous, and to our knowledge, none of the people involved have ever seen any criminal prosecution. So this is quite different of what some other groups today, like LulzSec, Anonymous, see. It's rather carefully planned, maybe even a bit militaristic in style, but in the end, everyone was kind of safe, except for the right-wing extremists, of course. Yes.
So what we don't want to talk about in here, because other people can talk about that, but it's all speculation in our opinion. That is the state-sponsored hacktivism and cyberwar people are talking about, that the US is fighting against China and China against the US, and India versus Pakistan, or just recently, some years ago, the Russians were fighting against Estonia and they claim to have done some denial of service attacks on the websites. That's actually the reason why then the NATO started and found a cyber security or cyber warfare lab in Estonia. But yeah, it's all, for us, it is all speculation because we don't know the internals, and we think that no one really knows the internals about those conflicts or those attacks.
Also, it's personally, it's not the kind of politics that I'm interested in. It is obviously political if one random state fights against another random state, but it's not something that I could get involved in. So it probably exists. There are lots and lots of hints pointing to that direction, but we personally don't find that very interesting. But we find it interesting enough to put up a slide to say that we don't find it interesting. Actually, we have a problem with the whole way this discourse around cyberwar is framed. If you look at this chart, we can clearly see that the whole discourse has been changed sometime after 2011. So
2001.
2001, 9/11, 2001. So, yeah, we used to have a fair distribution of the media. Well, I think these are examples collected from mainstream press, newspapers like New York Times, etc. This is quite an old study, but still relevant today. Before 9/11, we had a diverse description of these attacks as cyber attacks, cyber crime. People were calling it viruses, vulnerability, etc. Whereas after 9/11, it almost got exclusively labeled as a cyber attack. Yeah, why we always had to live with computer security, and lots of talks at this camp deal with the thing that there is no such thing as static computer security. The whole discourse that frames it changed a lot after 2001, and this may also be the reason why the hacktivism that was at a peak during the 1990s slowly faded away and is only now coming back in a very different form. Because basically it's all terrorism after 9/11. It's not a legitimate political movement. It's not people putting up demonstrations in the space where there are more and more living in, which is the internet. It's all terrorism. So let's have a look at the situation today.
And that is, on the one side, we have the hacktivists, which are, well, nowadays, or the recent stuff they are doing, or the recent groups are Anonymous, which was primarily against Scientology and then switched to be against the prosecution of WikiLeaks, or attacked Visa and MasterCard, for example, with denial of service attacks because they were banning WikiLeaks sponsors. Then we have more hacktivist groups which are more active and don't really do denial of service, but more security. So they go and hack some computers and publish private material or trade secrets, so-called trade secrets. Also from governments and government organizations. Another example is the No Name Crew, which has been active in Germany for the last month. LALSEC has only been active for this year for some days. And then still we have the Data Antifa, which is showing up every now and then. They don't get that many media coverage, but they're hacking Nazi fascist websites all the time and publish them and publish details about fascists. On the other hand, we have the lobbying organizations, so those organizations which are in the system and do lobbyism to convince politicians to take over their point of view. There's on the one side the Chaos Computer Club in Germany. Then we have Telecomex, which is more on a European level, and they are mainly based in Sweden, I think, and they're doing great stuff as well. Then we have EFF in the US, La Quadrature du Net, which is also a European-based organization doing lobbyism in Brussels. And then Digitale Gesellschaft, which is a newly found organization also doing lobbyism in Germany.
Both columns of the slide are I mean, it's really hard. You may notice that we put the both words in quotation marks because it's not fair to say. So this group consists entirely of hacktivists, and this group consists entirely of only lobbying that doesn't hurt anyone. Sometimes there's gray area stuff, and yeah, we may not have found the right word for it, and we're open for discussions on how to draw the distinction here. But I think one thing that is really different from the situation in the 1990s is that we do have now established go-to organizations that are visible in the open on the one hand, and that we have, yeah, clandestine direct action organization no one really knows much about. I was asked by the BBC whether I could provide them with an interview partner from Anonymous or LulzSec, and no. It's really not the way it works. I mean, CCC will be happy to provide someone to speak to the BBC and make their point clear, because that's the way it works. So please, media, choose the people to talk to. But there are things that are new. I already mentioned them. If we look at this direct action-oriented hacktivist groups, they're all loosely organized, if at all. We call it hive-minded, so there is one amorph group of people yeah, really acting out of consensus. Someone says, these assholes cut off the WikiLeaks funding. We should totally punish them. So out of the hive mind comes the idea of having denial of service attack on MasterCard or Visa, etc. There is few, if any, theoretical background, very much a big difference from the theory-heavy 1990s style hacktivist movement, where you would get the impression that these people actually were better at producing academic papers than writing code. It is all very ad hoc, so it's shoot first, ask questions later, which sounds bad, but can be effective in a way. I mean, everyone who has ever sat through a plenum at an activist group where everything has been said, but not by everyone, and still you have to discuss it ad nauseum, knows the problem. Sometimes, yeah, it's more effective to do anything at all than discuss it until everyone's sick of it. Apparently, it strikes a nerve with the media. It's highly visible in the media. It's highly effective. One could say that using this approach of just randomly firing is a little careless. There is it's not only careless against the potential victims, but also against the supporters of the cause. Very little security preparations are made. We could also say that maybe this is, in a way, unprofessional. Well, if you are in the profession of causing disruption, a lot of it is just done for the lols, for the kicks, for the fun. And if you look at the technology used, it becomes clear that this theoretical background these groups have and the technology they use actually go hand in hand, and say something about that.
Yeah, one example is the low-orbit ion cannon, which was published in order to do some distributed denial of service attacks, mainly. Yeah, that's just a simple interface everyone can download and can participate in that group and start attacking some hosts. So it was published and used by a lot of people. Some are actually now prosecuted because the low orbit ion cannon doesn't provide you with anonymity. And that was somehow a bad thing, because some activists or some people who wanted to be active, they discovered the low orbit ion cannon and thought it would be anonymous and they wouldn't be able to track them down. But actually some researchers found out that you can easily, especially with the data orientation in Europe, you can easily track down the people who use the low orbit ion cannon because of some coding mistakes and some fingerprints that they provided. And well, it's best used if you use some anonymity provider proxy like Tor or I2P before you fire the low orbit ion cannon, because otherwise you can get traced. And there are people currently prosecuted in Turkey, Spain, and several other countries just because they have used the low orbit ion cannon.
So basically, if you see that as an online demonstration, it has the equivalent of every person going to the demonstration handing in their passport at a central place and leaving it for whoever would be interested in prosecuting that demonstration afterwards. It is kind of careless, but if it is done in a coordinated way, we have seen it cause extreme havoc and take down websites within seconds. So it's a very effective denial of service attack tool. We have talked about this opposition of these young do-nothing, these young people who don't care about anything and just cause destruction on the internet. On the one hand,
we actually don't know whether these are young people or old people, because
or
we don't
artificial
know
intelligence.
who they are. Maybe these are the aliens.
Yeah. Huh? They don't care?
Just one thing, if you have interjections, questions, whatever. If you have interjections, questions, or whatever, please do stand up and go to a microphone, because there are people on the stream who won't hear you if you just yell in the room. And there are also a lot of people in this room who won't hear you. There's a microphone, and I'm sitting in front. I have a microphone, so just get up.
But please, let's discuss this stuff afterwards.
Yeah, I would really prefer to have something like Q&A afterwards.
Yeah.
Until then, you have to suffer our thoughts first. This distinction between these groups, on the one hand, the young punks, and on the other hand, the established grandfathers and grandmothers of internet activism like the CCC, isn't always that clear. So even the CCC in their time has toyed with the idea of distributed denial of service attacks to make a political statement. We have to go back quite some time to 1995, when the French government actually decided to restore the tests of the nuclear tests that they do in the
Mororoa atoll.
Yes. So at that time, we really didn't have something like an internet infrastructure that could be brought down. So it was a lot about the telephone system, a talk of that. And yeah, the CCC at that time, or one of their spokesperson, issued a call to arms to bring down the telephone infrastructure in France. They said that we should make their ears ring, their fax machines burn out, the telephone system collects, and their internet lines glow. Use all possible means of no-cost communication and intelligent handling of technology to avoid excessive financial transaction between you and your local telephone mafia. It was really the tone that you would expect to find in some pamphlet of Lalsec, Anonymous, etc. today, but we have come a long way. Nowadays, the CCC would strongly object to a message like that, even though it was official, kind of official back then. The CCC has taken a very different path and is now actually registered as experts who consult the highest court we have in Germany, the Court of Constitution.
Yeah, for example, in 2009, members of the Chaos Computer Club were asked to give some opinion for the data retention law in Germany, and they were asked by the highest court in Germany. The same has happened for voting machines and voting computer security. And that's what the Chaos Computer Club stands up for nowadays. So mainly it is a lobbyist organization which does a lot of interviews, a lot of press coverage. They are the experts to be asked about computers in Germany.
Yeah, changing the system from the inside, basically. And if we compare
the real world to the, or if we try to compare the real world to the internet, we have in the real world as well as in the internet some lobbyism, which can be done also on the internet. Then in the real world, we have demonstrations and strikes every now and then. And a similar thing would be the online petitions we have every now and then. So you can actually sign, or you can use your name to sign some online petition, and maybe it will make other people aware of that petition and of that specific opinion you want to present.
And it's all within a very established legal framework. So yeah, there are rules of how to do proper protest, offline and online. There are rules for demonstrations and strikes, and there are rules for online petition. But if you go one step further, the rules of what is legal and illegal seem to get more gray area.
Yeah, for example, in the real world, we have sit-ins and civil disobedience, like blockading deportations like we have it before. So there are actually people sitting in front of the airport and try to prevent the deportation from happening. In the internet, we have seen the deportation class thing, which is a distributed denial of service attack. And that's similar, at least at those days it was similar. So what you actually try to do is to get a system down, but you don't do any permanent damage. So you don't destroy the system, but you just delay it a bit. Yeah, in the real world, we also have the black bloc and the people who throw stones to get rid of their protest or of their anger and fear. And in the internet, we have the political hacking, like it has been done in the data Antifa, as well as the Lalsec movement. So they actually open systems and get into systems and then publish details about the internals.
So we were talking about how this discourse is framed and what effects that has on the way we do politics on the internet. And one very clear effect that it has is when you look at prosecution.
Yeah, the prosecution of sit-ins in the real world it's just a regulatory offense. So most of the time you don't get fined at all. Sometimes you have to give away your identity to the police, and that's actually all what's done with that. But in the real world, the throwing stones is a criminal offense. So if you get busted, or if police officers just next to you, you get fined and get a prosecution out of that. In the internet, the distributed denial of service, like Anonymous and Lalsec is doing, That's already been cited as cyberwar and cyber terrorism, although it is similar to the deportation class, and it doesn't really destroy any system out there. It just delays it and stuff like that. And yeah, the things LulzSec does, like political hacking, that is often being cited as being cyber terrorism. So if they get busted, it is being fined as terrorism and not as a simple criminal offense. So the prosecution on the internet, the digital prosecution is much higher, and well, the police or the secret services want to find those people and get a hold of them.
So yeah, I mean, take note, people. There are established means of taking your protest out in the offline world that we have enjoyed for several decades, sometimes even centuries. When moving to the digital domain, suddenly everything gets framed within this discourse of cyber terrorism, cyber war. We are giving up rights that we have in the offline world, which used to be the main sphere of public interaction that we used to live in. Now that we basically live on the internet, everything that used to be okay or used to be maybe a regulatory offense, a minor offense, suddenly becomes cybercrime, suddenly becomes cyber terrorism. And this, I think, will do a lot of damage to the way we have politics on the internet. Actually, we as a hacker community may be responsible for that as well, because we, in order to cover our asses, we said, yeah, well, these are not real hackers, but whether we like it or not, I think different styles of hacking can coexist, or they must coexist, whether we like it or not. There will always be people who act like assholes out of puberty and just doing things for the lols, and whether we like it or not doesn't really matter. And this is part of hacking, and showing some solidarity to some poor teenager who got busted because he used the wrong distributed denial of service attack tool is maybe something that will make us a better person, and not so much covering our asses and saying, you know, these were not hackers to begin with. Of course, I mean, pick your battles and see that some of these things will get short-term attention in the media, as we see it now, while working towards real change. Really changing things will be a much longer process, and doesn't really have anything to do with firing your low-orbit ion cannon. We also see a danger that actions like Anonymous or LulzSec are comparable to the Cold War's arms race, that it will end in both sides, the legal team and the not-so-legal team, just piling up arms until everything ends in tears. So I don't really know if this is a productive thing that we should get involved in, but it's really not the question, because these decisions aren't really ones that we make. They are made for us, and they are made for us at this moment anyway. So don't dismiss this new style hacktivism too soon. Maybe we can learn something from it. To everyone who thinks it's a good thing to engage in stuff like full contact hack sports, as I would say, the thing that can get you in trouble with the law, it is really good to have an exit strategy, except that goes beyond everyone ends up in jail. You should think about it, that you cannot have both things and be a rock star on the media and throw stones at websites at the same time. So what we found surprising is that even though there is little theoretical underpinning in groups like LulzSec, Anonymous, there is, there's to a certain degree some awareness that they are standing on the shoulders of giants, or that they at least share some history with 1990s style hacktivism. So when Anonymous and LulzSec issued a joint statement just a few weeks ago, July 21st, they used the words that the anonymous bitch slap rings through their ears like hacktivism movements of the 90s. We're back and we're not going anywhere. Expect us. I find this statement interesting for two reasons. One is the one I already gave you. They realize that they come from a certain history. And they realize that they are not the first one, and they specifically mention the 1990s style hacktivism movement. The other reason that I find interesting is the wording, which is misogynist. It's against women. They use the word bitch slap for a reason. It's like bragging, sexist, hacker machos all over again, and of course they're bragging like they're back and they're not going anywhere, expect us. Wow. So I think this is one critique that we could really give to this new style movement, a critique of hacker machismo.
Yeah, we have a critique on that sexism and unreflected privileges in communication is not the way to go. I mean, all those newly funded hacker groups or hackers, they should think more about sexism and the society they want to live in, as well as what they publish, and if it's just unreflected bullshit, they shouldn't publish it. I found this nice image on the internet that we could be, or the human society could be much more in the future, and we could have already explored the galaxy if we could stop being dicks for a few minutes, which shows that this man-dominated society we're currently living in is still a big bunch of sexist people, and we don't really want that. We want to have a change in the society to be more friendly to smaller groups and to women and to non-heteronormativity people. And another critic on the newly funded hacker groups is the lack of solidarity through the careless operations like the low-orbit ion cannon, which was expected by some people to provide anonymity, but it didn't. So some people who didn't want to get too much involved, they actually now are being prosecuted. And there's not really a solidarity action like there's no big fund of money for lawyers for the processes in those groups. And those lawyer groups, for example, in the left-wing scene, has been established several years ago. It's called in German the Rote Hilfe, the Red Help, which is a small group of people who collect money and provide lawyers for demonstrations and all that.
Maybe we need something for computer people as well. The green on black help, something. Anyway, we're coming to the end of our presentation, and we will have time for a short Q&A round, but let us allow to have some closing remarks. We think that whether we like it or not, there is a need for proactive hacking, and some of it will be called illegal, some of it will be called legal. This is just a discussion that we need to have anyway. We think that it's legitimate and necessary to have political protest, and we should bring that political protest out of the cyber terrorism discourse. That is one of the top goals we should get engaged in right now. No matter on what side you are in this anonymous LulzSec scenario, this discussion needs to be had. Yeah. Hacker ethics, as understood by the CCC, were a really useful tool. We had a set of rules like use public data and protect private data, don't disturb other people's private data, etc. Apparently, with the younger groups that don't feel that groups like the CCC speaks for them anymore, it may lose its influential power as a regulative narrative. So we have to think about how to deal with that.
Again, we also have to think about that currently a lot of conflicts gets depoliticized by claiming everything to be a discourse of experts, and normal people don't understand that, but we are experts, so trust us and we provide you with a statement. But what we should do instead is trying to explain that to the people, and don't claim to be experts, but explain it to the people and stay political. Because all those experts are then not political anymore, but these are experts, domain experts. They are unpolitical, and that's just the voice of the off. But what we need instead is a political movement against all that.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start with a personal comment. There are parallels to the Rote Hilfe in the digital age. One is called the Orange Help. Okay, they're very party affiliated, but they do exist, and they are a bunch of lawyers. And also for the last, I don't know, 20 years, there's been the Electronic Frontier Foundation doing amazing work. But now, to the general public, please ask questions or make your comments. And make it up here on the microphone.
Okay, a few minutes ago you were talking about the young cyberpunks who don't care if they are using, for example, the low-orbit ion cannon to attack websites. And that was the question that interrupted you from somewhere over there, who asked, how do you know if they don't care? Because me, for myself, if I attack a website through the low-orbit ion cannon because Anonymous or someone else organization asks for, I may very well care, but I don't know a better way to do it. So how do you know they don't care? I think they do.
Yeah, you're correct. It's oversimplified to put it that way. These young cyberpunks don't care, etc. This is basically repeating media stereotypes. I have to apologize for that. On the other hand, I think it goes without saying that the low-orbit ion cannon is a very carelessly designed tool. It is very effective. It is really not optimized for anonymity, and so yeah, by choosing this weapon, you will have to live with the consequences of that.
Sure.
I want to add one thing as a question. What means with carelessly is basically if you do such sort of DDoS attacks, it's not only that you take down a target, you have like lots and lots of side effects of those attacks. It means like it's not only this one host will take down, it's just you probably take down an infrastructure of a whole network. And that's carelessly, in my point of view, because you are not able to specifically only take down one target, especially if you have like shared hosting, or if you have a network which is not designed for like heavy traffic. So that's the main thing.
Hi. Hello. I took notes. So I wanted to say you're missing some really important context, which is, for example, the Billboard Liberation Front from, say, like the 70s until now. They've even contributed like anti-NSA wiretapping culture jamming on billboards. And the Critical Art Ensemble, I think, talked a lot about the transfer of power from the physical world into the electronic world, where the idea with the sit-in is that you block power because power is people moving into buildings where in buildings actions take place. And so this idea that a distributed or a non-distributed denial of service attack is equivalent was sort of coined by them in one of their books. And what they basically said is that the flow of power was in people and now it's in electricity. And so I think we probably are in agreement there that is kind of the equivalent in that movement. But it came from the Critical Art Ensemble. They did a lot of the JavaScript denial of service stuff. But when you talked about the hacktivism of and the anti-globalism protests of the 90s, you viewed it through sort of this lens of your own privilege, I think, because in case you hadn't heard about the G20 in Canada recently, it was the largest mass arrest in Canadian history resisting globalism. And I think it's really important to note that it's not necessarily the case that globalism resistance has failed, but rather that you became part of the establishment that it is fighting against. And that I could be projecting there. Probably am a little bit. But you also mentioned a couple of things that were surprising, but you didn't mention the corporate engineering of the media, which is one of the largest hacks that has taken place. And it seems like the corporate engineering of the media is one of the largest hacks that has ever occurred, because they're literally able to program society. What Rupert Murdoch can do by controlling Fox News is basically destroy the United States. I mean, it's a thought. And so I think that there's some solipsism that comes from the 1990s, which you should address by understanding that the 90s and the globalist movement that stuff was existing in the 80s with Mendax, right? When Julian was owning the shit out of the Australian government and leaking documents, and he got arrested. It's documented in the Underground book. This is something that has been around as long, and in some cases, it was tied to the CCC in the very beginning. And so I don't think you should disown that past. So.
For your additions, very valuable, and you're absolutely right that, of course, the lens of my own privilege may blur my view of what is objectively true, but then again, what is objectively true. But thank you for your additions, very valuable. Thank you.
Sure.
Imself Arama from Heidelberg has a question. He asks, do you think the cyber activist movement does splinter more and more, leading to less or more influence in general?
Predictions are hard because they deal with the future.
Yeah.
So we don't
One thing I know for sure is that the internet as a sphere of public interchange will not go away. It will become more relevant. So protest that is based on the internet will become more relevant.
Good. And one more from the IRC channel, from Bonaviscalia, who's in Germany, vaguely, would like to ask whether you have suggestions on how to describe to non-geek environments why hacktivism, in the form it appears in the general media, is a great idea. Why is it a great idea?
Protest is a great idea. Making your voice heard is a great idea if you want to change something politically. This is just, for me, it's just a continuation of what you already do in the offline world. So, more power to them. Yeah.
Good answer. Dankeschön.
Hello. You said that there's no or little, if any, political or theoretical background within Anonymous. How do you come to this conclusion?
Well, they don't have published any manifests or something like that, which earlier groups have done.
Oh, wow.
But they they agree on some consensus for every action they have. So the manifest, so to say, or the thesis they have, or the statements they want to make, they change over time, which is a good thing, because I mean you have to reevaluate and think about your own opinion every now and then.
Yeah, I did a lot of research and did read a lot of discussions regarding Anonymous, and my impression is that there's a very high level of theoretical background, just as a remark.
In the political science sense of the word?
Yes, like references to Adorno, Foucault, yeah, it's on a very high
I must have missed that.
philosophical level. So I think it's a little bit unfair to just this Anonymous as, yeah.
Well then, on the other hand, I mean, everyone can claim to be anonymous, so it's really not possible to make any statements about Anonymous that are definite. So yeah, there may be stuff like that, but I think as a whole, it's not one group trying to put together a theory as a framework for the work first, and then coming up with things to do second. I would really insist on that, yeah. Do we have time for...
First, please try to keep the background noise low. So if you want to talk, leave as quietly as possible, or just shut up. Sorry, but it's annoying. All the other people. Secondly, since we are running out of time, or to keep it somewhat viewable how much more time we need, everybody who wants to ask a question, please stand up now, otherwise he will be the last questioner. Thank you.
This is a comment. Well, first, thank you very much. I really enjoy your presentation. This is a comment for your presentation, but in general for the whole program of the camp. I'm very surprised because I came from Spain, where since the 15th of May we are having the largest mobilization we have had in democracy since the transition in the 75. Much, much, much bigger than the global movement. I mean, with a level of support of 80% of the population was in favor about another democracy now and taking the streets. And this is a huge political expression. And I'm surprised that this is happening in Spain, it's happening in Greece, it's happening in Portugal, now it's happening in Israel too, and it's like not present in the scenario of the discussions here. And also because I don't like to say how it's going to be the future, but in the 15th of October there is going to be a huge global mobilization. And when you were saying about how in the 90s, like experiences like indie media or the hackers were very much connected to the global movement, I think in your talk it was lacking. What is going to be about hacking in a context of huge civic getting active? And in this regard, I would like to say two things. One is that in Spain, Anonymous was very much connected to the civic mobilizing. It was part of the symbols, the few symbols, and there were many hacking creativity connected to the way to communicate inside of the movement. And second, I think what happened with the current mobilization in Spain is that it's not about activists anymore. It's about active citizenship. And it's not about like experts, like you were saying. It's that even like people without many kind of deep knowledge about technology are making cyber-terrorism, are just going and blocking the banks' websites or these kind of things. And so it's also a way of getting far from the discourse about experts or discourse about hackers as if any regular citizen could be, and also to think about how hacking means in a context of mass mobilization as it's going to happen.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. It's absolutely true that the program of this camp lacks something that sheds some light on the role of the internet and maybe the role of hackers in the protests going on in the Mediterranean area, in Israel, etc. And also we don't have any talk on the role of the internet in the Arab Spring. But yeah, while I find this very, very important, I don't think really it was within the scope of this talk. So sorry for not mentioning it, but it's more of a general problem that we don't have a talk for that topic.
Hi. I think actually I wanted to kind of reiterate some of the sentiments that the last woman who just asked made a comment. It seemed that your analysis was very lacking in what the actual politics were of a lot of the events that you mentioned. They seem to be taken out of context and not contextualized with Anonymous or LulzSec or whatever seemed to be the main focus of your talk. But I think there is a huge political groundswell amongst people, amongst citizens, and there is a huge use of the internet. There's also, there are big political movements that have come out of organizations such as Indie Media and a move towards online digital rights, if you like. And the other thing that I think was very interesting that you completely missed is the whole free software movement and the way that is actually in many ways a political thing, even though it isn't always necessarily contextualized in that way. But free software is a fight back against the Microsofts, against the Apples and the Googles and the rest of it, and that is people doing stuff, you know. That's what a lot of people here are involved in, and a lot of other people elsewhere are starting to use those services.
I absolutely agree. Writing software can be a political hack, a political act, and we actually had a slide on that which we left out. And I think we left out so many aspects that you could actually have a whole Congress just on this topic of hacktivism, politics, and computer use, etc., which may be necessary in the future.
I don't think it's just the writing of free software, though. I think it's the actual use and the actual use of these tools. And there are organizations that online provide services. For example, I'm going to quote just one example, lists.riseup.net, that has almost 4 million users. But I'm getting timed out there, so.
So I guess I had two points in response. I agree with that guy entirely, right? But also the tool adoption, lack of analysis comment that you made, I think that it's important to note you don't have to read Michel Foucault to have lived, because our lives provide the analysis. When someone fires a tool, you actually know that they have done some kind of political analysis because they're stating an intention by sending packets on the wire. And it's pretty clear that Anonymous has solidarity with lots of groups, especially in the Arab Spring, but like, you're talking about terrorism. I'm a person who is being targeted as a terrorist in the United States. You left WikiLeaks off the slide there, which I thought was very strange, right? All the groups, when you divided them into two groups, I mean, I don't know about you, but those were all the same groups to me, because each of those organizations has some analysis and has some direct action and has some public media stuff. And to say that we are sort of giving up our rights on the internet, it's not that. You know, Thoreau had a struggle too, right? All of the people that practice civil disobedience in the real world had to make that a thing that we could take for granted. And we have to fight those battles too, and in fact, that's what's happening. And so when the bourgeoisie comes in and says, oh, that's not professional hacking, well, you know, fuck them, basically. I mean, we're making a difference, and free software is a part of that, and it's really important, I think, to support people that are making these things, because they are making a challenge at great risk in some cases. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I agree. I think, even though you phrased it like you disagree with us. I would like to have a chat with all of you outside, because I think there are more things to discuss. So come outside the shelter and we can meet there.